you've got to buy the lot, and it's going to be far more than you need. So,
yep, great. Hi, Tessa. Hi, how you doing? How are you all? Good. Give us a wave. Yeah, good to see you. Welcome along. Good to chat to you earlier. So yeah, I was just saying it's nice and snowy down here in Queenstown in the south of the South Island of New Zealand. So you're welcome, all welcome at any time.
It's a bit chilly here. I'm just waiting for the Pacific bubble to open back up.
Yeah. What's the latest news? I think Jacinda's just mentioned level 1, has she?
From tonight. Yeah.
From tonight, yeah.
Midnight tonight. So what an achievement, hey?
Yeah, what a great achievement for the country altogether. I suppose we're all just we're all nice and compliant, aren't we? So
that's us.
There's no troublemakers here. Hey, Sue.
Oh, not in New Zealand, John. We don't do that.
Hi.
Yeah, I know. Well, welcome along. Hi, everybody else who doesn't have video. Mr. 684890, whoever you are. There's another couple of Johns there. And Nicholas, how you doing? Anna, Brian, Chloe, Esther, how are you all doing? Either give me a wave in the chat if you want. Oh, we've got Queenstown meeting room as well. Mr. Scott, I can recognize a few faces there. How you doing? A few Toastmasters coming along. So it's good. We're going to get going in just a moment. Well, we're probably running out of moments. We're going to get going and get focused in. Hey, Nicholas, how you doing? So let me just share the good stuff with you, and maybe we'll get started today. So let me know how you're seeing that, or any troubles. Just fill in the chat. So look, welcome along to our fifth week of looking at presentology. And we've looked at lots of different things over the weeks, haven't we? We've looked at virtual presenting, we've looked at slides, and there's a couple of bonus weeks, and I'm going to give people some options what they'd like to do in the bonus weeks towards the end of June. But the next couple of weeks are really looking at the common mistakes that people make when they stand up and present, which we're going to do today, and also how to really create an impactful story and where you find good stories. Because that's, if you think about it, the essence of your presentation is a good story. So we're going to look at things like maybe, bringing along a prop, or how we work on numbers, dressing up numbers, where we find our passion and where we bring out the passion for our story, but then also how we put the story together. And I've got some gifts for you today. I've got some storyboarding and some storyboard ideas for you. So, and how to put the scripts together. And then we can indeed, I think we're going to come back to slides maybe in the end of June. Last couple of weeks, we're going to look at some other advanced features of slides, because we didn't get through all of it. But next week, we're going to do public speaking, I think, is the logical flow. So we'll flow into public speaking and kind of, body language, voice, projection, different skills around that. So we'll look at that. And we did also cover audience engagement last week. So as always, please, if you've got a lot of noise in the background, please keep yourself muted, but feel free at any point. This is a meeting, not a webinar. And we talked about that last week, the negative impact of doing webinars. Webinars are a one-way means of communication. And as you learned last week, interaction is a difference between a monologue and a dialogue. So we want the dialogue. Yeah. So we got any questions, or you want to throw some questions in the chat there, we'll definitely have some time to look at those today. And I'm going to do some polls as we go through today, so you'll get engaged on the polls. But try to view me in side-by-side mode. What do I mean by that? You go up to that little green bar at the top up there, or on the side, depends what you're using. And you can also view me in side-by-side mode. So I'm hoping you're going to see me on one side and the slides on the other side. That's ideally the way to view a meeting, and it's up to you to do that. I can't force that on you. Webinars you can, but you can't on meetings. So, but certainly there's a little gray handle in the center and between these two windows, and you can drag it left or right. And once you discover that, you're like, oh, cool. I can either look at the person, or I can focus in on the actual slide. So it might help if I, in this meeting, were to spotlight myself, which would sort of force a larger picture to be up there. So yeah, just try to do that as we go through. Quick poll just to see who's here and get us warmed up a little bit. Let me launch the polling and see how it goes. So you should be seeing how you're feeling today, but then a question around what the biggest problem on presentations is in your view. So it'd just be good to get your feedback on that, so how are you feeling, number one, and number two, what's your biggest presentation problem? You either just click on the screen or click on it. So we do see a lack of storytelling in presentations, and I'm an Irishman, so I'm going to probably have to tell you a few stories today as we go through. We're talking about stories. And also, where can you practice storytelling? Well, you know, where do you practice to get fit? You go to the gym. Where's the gym for public speakers? Toastmasters. So we're going to maybe give a shout out to them. We've got a big meeting tomorrow night here in Queenstown. So certainly storytelling seems to be one of the things that people are challenged with. And I'm just going to share those results with you. Thank you for everyone who voted. And there's the results. So most people are full of life and raring to go, which is good. That's a good way to be. I know this COVID thing can get us down and drag us back a little bit, but we got to, you know, get moving and get communicating is a great thing to do. So yeah, a lot of you feel that the lack of storytelling in presentations is a challenge, and I would agree with you. That's one of the things we're going to look at. Where do we find great stories, and how can we create our story or develop our story? But also, what is a great structure for a story? You know, what's the ideal structure, and is there a hidden structure behind presentations that, you know, is in every presentation, from Steve Jobs' pitch for the iPhone through to, you know, some crazy presenters maybe like Hitler or something? Is there that sort of structure in it? And we're going to uncover that today and have a look at that. So yeah, well, definitely. And of course, there's an all of the above. A few people feel that all of the above, which is certainly some of the elements that we'll look at as we go through today. So yeah, thank you for giving us that feedback. I didn't really touch on this, but I wanted to tell you a little story about myself. Yeah, you can hear from my accent, the Belfast accent, born in Belfast, around the Troubles and the Troubles that went on there. My dad worked for the BBC, and I was brought up around the BBC, so it was natural I would go into some sort of audiovisual role in life, and I did. I went over to the UK and worked for Thames Water, building SCADA-based large screen displays, and kind of enjoyed that. But decided to travel in '96 and went traveling as far as I could. And you can see some big hair there from '96, where myself and my wife were heading off around the world in '96. And we traveled as much as we could, and first came here at that point and really enjoyed it, but thought that Dubai was an interesting place and thought that we'd end up spending some time in Dubai. And certainly in 2001, we got the chance to start our own business and started building slides. Actually, I was very lazy because I was working in production, and I always remember that my motto was I wanted to be the last one to arrive at a big production and the first one to leave. So if you were to watch a time lapse of a big room being set up for a production, you would see the lighting being hung, and then a stage set come in, and then the back screens go in, and the backdrop go in, and the speakers go in. And then the last person to arrive would normally be the presenter. And I thought, I want to be as close to that person as possible. So we started doing presentation work, really making the slides for the presenter. And I always remember at the end of an event, you know, people would look at us and we'd be packing up our couple of laptops and heading off home. And the lighting guys and the sound guys would still be there right through the night, breaking it down. But we made about 700 slides the first year. And then over the next 10 years, Dubai being the sort of place it was, you know, latest technology, last minute was very often the motto there. And we learned the ability to do that. You had to move very, very quickly. And, you know, that would even apply to, for example, rendering a video. If you were going to put up a big video up on a screen at an event for Jones Lang LaSalle, for example, if you were to render that out into a video, that would be beautiful. It would work on a big LED wall. But what would happen? Yep, at the last minute, somebody would say, hey, excuse me, that number there, can you just change that? So the last minute nature of events forced us to look at a live rendering tool to deliver messages. And what's the best live rendering tool on every desktop? It's PowerPoint. PowerPoint is a live editing tool that allows you to create content very, very quickly. And so, you know, we created some huge presentations on massive displays, all built in PowerPoint. But the idea was to stop it looking like PowerPoint, to make it look less PowerPointy. And that's one of the challenges that we had. So by 2010, we'd made about 17,000 slides. And in 2015, when we decided that really would like to expand and bring our little clan down here, down to New Zealand, we've got up to 27,000 slides. So if you were going to listen to somebody who's made 27,000 slides and seen a lot of different presentations, then that's me. So I'm looking forward to taking you through this session. We have a problem, ladies and gentlemen, and the problem is that really slides and presentation times and our time is getting less and less. You know, I mean, I've got you for an hour today, and thank you for investing that time. But you're investing your time, and there's a lot of, you know, distractions and other things you need to do, and other impacts that impact on you. So we noticed that presentation times generally over the past 10 years have really shrunk. When's the last time you went to a presentation and listened solidly to somebody presenting for 60 minutes to an hour. Well, some of you are going to say that happens all the time, and that's still a challenge. But we're noticing that the times are getting less, you know. So more and more so we're hearing this 20 minutes. Give me your pitch, your key pitch, you know, in 20 minutes. That's all the time you have. And that's a great idea because people's attention span, you may have heard before, sort of lasts around 20 minutes. And you want to be trying to break up people's attention span every 20 minutes, especially if you're a trainer or you've got a long day going on. Now, any ideas where that number 20 came from? Well, we think it might come from this graph, and this is the graph of engagement on the upper axis over time, over a 1 hour meeting. And here is that graph, yeah? So you're talking about, you know, at 20 minutes having probably half the engagement that you start off with. At the start, people are real interested and they're, you know, want to get involved. And by 20 minutes in, they're like, okay, you know, and it's starting to lose it. Notice that at 40 minutes, people seem to get more engaged. Why do you think that is? Why are people more engaged after 40 minutes of a 1 hour meeting? Because it's going to end. Yeah. And the presenter says, so in summary, or summarizes. So summarizing more often is a great idea. And I'm going to summarize a couple of times for you today, you know. So the idea is to kind of sum up more often. Every 20 minutes, there's a key idea. Just drop a summary in there. So in summary, because you will notice that people will naturally liven up. So yeah, some interesting ideas around that. But the other place we feel that 20 may have come from was the presentation rule of thumb, the 10-20-30 rule from Guy Kawasaki. Nothing to do with motorcycles. He's a same name, but he's an angel investor. He was one of the original investors in Apple, and he was, you know, a VC. As a venture capitalist, he had hundreds of people pitching ideas at him constantly. And follow him. He's quite an interesting dude. He comes up with some new ideas all the time. But one of the most interesting things he did was way back in the 80s, he had an outburst at a conference once, and he came up with the 10-20-30 rule of presenting. Now, if there was nothing else you remembered from today, if you just remembered these three numbers and how they can impact on your presentations, then I'd urge you to do so. So what do you think 10 refers to in terms of presentations? 10 slides? 10 slides would be a good idea. Yeah, for sure. 10 slides would be an absolute ideal. And that's what he said. We can't take the 100 slides from you. We just need 10 simple slides from you. That's what we want, with one idea per slide. Now, that's a big challenge when I go into corporates and build presentations for people, because they can't get it in 10 slides. But 10 slides would be the ideal pitch before you get to interaction, before you ask them what you want to talk about. So that would be traditionally your vision and your mission. Please don't use those, but you know, your statement, who we are, what we do. Those should be the bits at the start of your presentation, and that should take up to 10 slides, where we're based, who we are, what sort of people we are. Those are your pitch slides that really get your message across. So 10 slides delivered in 20 minutes. Yeah. So 20 minutes is the ideal amount of time that you've got to get your message across. And, you know, I noticed myself that when I used to run around doing selling, and when I was out selling, and as I still am, I try to, you know, stop the 1 hour meeting. I would say to people, let me just take 20 minutes of your time and explain what we do. And people really loved it. It really resonates with people if you can take less of their time. Remember that your audience are time poor. And if you respect their time, they love you for it. Keep them another 10 minutes over an hour and they will hate you for it. So really be careful about the time and how you use it. Now we've covered 10 slides, 20 minutes. What do you think the 30 is? Right, the 30 is a difficult one. The 30, go on.
The points on your slides, so the
very
font.
Good, yeah, good, very good. Not just the points on your slide, but the actual minimum font size. This is what he came up with. So if 30 is a minimum font size on your slide, then that's pretty good. You really have to know what you're talking about. So if we just compare the sizes of fonts, if you look at 32 down to 8, you'll see that a lot of your slides, if you look at them, have got very dense information on them and a lot of information on them. And in fact, you know, if 30 is your sort of benchmark, then you'll notice that quite often people have a lot less. I mean, think about the demographic of who you're speaking to. If you're trying to pitch an idea, it's quite often to, you know, the older person. Now, number one, they've got glasses. Number two, you know, they can't see very well. For example, they might not be wearing their glasses that day. So why don't you, you know, keep the font size large? I mean, if you have to put lots of information on your slide in small fonts, it's quite likely you're trying to do something else with PowerPoint. You're trying to create a handout, and that should be handed out. So we're talking about delivering live here. You want 30 as your minimum font. If you want a formula for that, find out who the oldest person is in the audience and divide his or her age by 2. That is your optimum font size. So unless you're pitching to 18-year-olds, stop using the 9-point font. Yeah, we're looking for, you know, a nice, big, simple font that you can put on the screen. The second problem we have, ladies and gentlemen, as well as the time getting less, is that basically that people's attention span is getting shorter and shorter. There's so much information out there. If you consider in terms of bubbles what you actually think, yeah, of all the information you want to get across, and then what you can actually put into, you know, on-screen text, or what you can actually communicate to people, and then consider what you're actually going to say to people in the time that you have. The amount of, you know, information is getting smaller and smaller, and then what the audience actually understands, because, you know, you haven't heard, some of you haven't heard me speak before, and you're still trying to work out, can I understand his accent? Do I know what he's saying? So, you know, just understanding the nuances of what people say can be very confusing for a lot of audiences. Now, there is unfortunately one smaller part to all of this. What do you think it is? It's what the audience are going to remember, what they're going to actually take away. And it's a tiny amount of information based around the huge amount of information that you've got to give away. And that's a real challenge in communication, is how do we really be memorable? What are you going to remember about this presentation tomorrow? You know, how are you going to remember it, and what are you going to focus in on? So try to remember that there's a huge disparity between those two things, and the way and the route to forcing memory, we're going to look at that today. We're going to look at how we really get people to engage and how they actually really remember. You would think that somebody like this would have, you know, a team of people helping him sort of put content together. But this, unfortunately, is, you know, the sort of communication that we saw going up on slides and being presented to people. And yet his nemesis, the person who kind of was up against all the time, he, you know, he knew how to create real impact with people. He knew how to really create an emotion in people and really get people emotive about a subject. And we're going to look at how we do that and how he did it. You know, the thing is that audiences are essentially on strike. They're either switched off, they're doing something else. If this was a webinar, people may be, you know, off doing something. Could be walking, could be doing other work, sending emails. So you've got to try and get their time, and you've got to really not do some of the things that the people are suggesting to you here. And our third problem I'd like to identify to you, you've heard this maybe before, I need the wow factor. I mean, what is the wow factor? We need to get people engaged and really engage them. And how do we do that? If just one person in the audience is engaged and learned something, then I argue you've done your job as a presenter. The idea is to get people just to go, wow, I didn't know that. So you're trying to force memory retention by creating engagement. You'll enjoy that. Remember that stuff. I hope that's really annoyed you for the last time ever. I never want to hear it again. Unfortunately, I have to listen to these regularly. So before we come on and look at the good stuff, we've got to look at the problems, at the common issues we see and how people deliver. So this is called word art. We don't use it anymore. Okay, so please stop using it if you've got any slides. The number one mistake really in the world is that people tend to put every word they're saying on their PowerPoint slide. Although it eliminates the need to memorize your talk, ultimately it makes your slides crowded, wordy, and boring, and you lose your audience attention before you reach the bottom of your first slide. Okay, so reading your slides is the number one hate of audiences. Yeah, we've seen it in energy levels in rooms that somebody walks up and starts presenting and starts reading their slides. It is absolute death. The room just turns into a whole negative environment of people reading it. So let me tell you a story about that. I was in Saudi Arabia in Riyadh a few years ago, and we were doing a conference for Saudi Arabian Airlines. And there was a big crew, and there were 1,000 people in the audience. And we had one particular gentleman, an engineer, I hasten to add, who we obviously can see as the crew, we can see how many slides he had. He had 175 slides. And we really thought that he was going to stop when he got to his 1 hour limit, but he didn't. He kept going. And we actually referred to him and created a new persona around presenters called the hostage taker. So he was going to take the whole audience hostage. His time was up and he couldn't, he was being told to stop with the flashing lights and the traffic lights. No, but he was going to keep going. One, you know, he got to, I think he was around 100 and he got the 102 and 103. And we're talking on the communication system and we're like, I think he's going to keep going. I don't think he's going to stop. He's going to keep on going the whole way through. And he just kept reading his slides over and over. And the audience were sinking further and further down into their seats. And we had to do something about it. So as crew, we've got flashing lights. We've got messages going up on the screen below him saying, your time is up, please stop. And we couldn't stop him. Do you know how we eventually stopped him? And this has become a common use case in a lot of big presentations and big corporates. Now, if you watch the Oscars, you'll see that they will slowly ramp up music to fade out the person, but it's really quite rude thing to do. What we discovered is that the tone 15 kilohertz, which is a small little squeaky tone, like ee, 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 that little tone, we can generate it from the sound desk and we would fire it into the speakers which are near to him up on the stage, and it would completely stop him talking. And that's how we were able to control this person and get rid of them off the stage. So we actually had to go that far to shut somebody up because all they wanted to do was to continually read their slides. And reading your slides is a sign of, it's an amateur sign of being fearful. Yeah, you're just going to read what's on your slide and you're going to read down through it. Think about it. If you read your slides to your audience, you're actually telling them that they're too stupid to read their slides themselves. So, you know, the best thing you could do is be quiet and just let them read it. So really, please, you can refer to what's on your screen, but please don't read verbatim. The classic example of that is reading a quotation. Please never read a quotation. Steve Jobs said this, or Henry Ford said this, but please don't read it verbatim to them. It's actually a moment as a presenter, you can relax and you can take a breath and stop. So I'd ask you to take a pledge with me now. You can do it if you want. You can put your hand on your chest. You can take this pledge with me. I promise to never read another slide, okay? And I'm urging you to never read what's on a slide again, okay? Take that pledge. We'll have a few more pledges as we go through. Here are the top 10 things that nervous amateurs say. If you recognize yourself in any of these, then please stop doing it, okay? Please stop starting your presentation with an apology. I'm very sorry, I had very little time to do this. I just threw these few slides together for you. It's the #1 starting point of a lot of people. I'm very sorry, I woke up late and I'm very sorry I couldn't get here early. Apologizing at the start just drives us down. You know, telling us that you're nervous. We know you're nervous. Everyone's nervous, yeah? It's just a case of getting over it. You don't need to tell us about it. We want you to start with impact. You know, #7, asking generally, do I have what's my time? It's your job as a presenter to know how much time you have. It's not everyone else's job to tell you, yeah? So you've got to try and keep control over your time. Using, #9, using filler words, ums, ahs. I have a challenge with the word basically, and I know if I can see a few faces out there and I know a few, but you know that some people have a challenge with this, is ums and ahs or so's or buts or like, you know, Aussie, I notice a lot in Aussie, like would start a sentence with a like. So it's just, or look or like, those are all filler words. Now there are different apps that can help you and will listen to you, as we talked about a few weeks ago. There's Ori, which we'll cover when we cover delivery, that will actually listen to your voice and highlight those filler words. So work out that. I think #4 is probably one of the most hated statements I've ever heard anyone say. If I hear somebody say, let me just read this slide for you, is possibly the most arrogant thing that someone could say from the stage. Yeah, so please, as you're presenting, try to make it engaging, try to remove these comments. So please stop using TLAs, yeah, when you're presenting. What's a TLA? A 3-letter acronym. So if you're constantly using 3-letter acronyms, certainly if your industry doesn't know it, then why are you saying RGB? What are your 3-letter acronyms or 4-letter acronyms? Try to remove them and make them as simple as possible. spell cheating. I've got some hidden spelling mistakes in my entire presentation, so look out for them. So look out for any sort of dodgy spelling mistakes. It's got a red line under it in PowerPoint. It's the last thing you should be doing, is presenting common words that people get wrong. And here are our top 10 common words. Watch out for any of these. They're very easy and they can slip through. Yeah, weird seems to be a problem that people have a problem with. But certainly these three are a common issue when we see people presenting that cause a huge problem in terms of presentation. And, you know, it really is route one to understanding and also to people's view of you as an intellectual. You know, if you're got one spelling mistake, it can really drop the whole conversation. So I noticed a couple of weeks ago, I was presenting to a bunch of people and somebody found one of the spelling mistakes that I have in my pitch, and I was like, well done, you found it. You know, so some people are fanatical about this. Get it absolutely 100% right, because you know it can really sort of knock you down as a presenter. So yeah, whether it's whichever one you have. Now, the term bullet point, ladies and gentlemen, came from Robert Gaskins, who invented PowerPoint. And he was driving along a road in Florida one day and saw a sign at the side of the road with a bullet hole next to it. And it had a bullet hole next to some text that somebody had shot a hole through. So the term bullet point comes from real bullets. Now, I'm from Belfast in Northern Ireland, where there are enough bullets, and there were enough bullets. So we want you to be bulletproof. We want you to be a bulletproof presenter. So this is one of my hardest challenges for you today, and one of the pledges I would really urge you to consider. And I'm asking you to never use another bullet point. I'm asking you to remove the round black dot or the round white dot, or the tick or the diamond. I've got no problem with segmented text on a slide, but as we looked at when we created slides, we want blocks of text with an icon next to them. So simply, if you replace the bullet point with a icon, it will change the slide dramatically and stop it looking like PowerPoint. So just remember, I'm the boy from Belfast and I'm banning bullets, okay? That's really what I'm all about, okay? We need to get rid of them. Bullets don't work at all, and the best way that I can prove to you that bullets don't work is to, yes, one, put this slide up, but number two, make you read it. So away you go, read it. I want you to read this slide. Go on, I'll give you a moment just to read it, because it does the whole sales pitch for me. You know, as a presenter, it's very difficult to be silent. And as an Irishman, it's also very difficult to be silent. So bullets essentially make your life easier because you can read them. But you can see the third last bullet point down there, you've already forgotten the flow of it. So it doesn't necessarily map to our logic. And you know, this is the kind of jokey element to it, but there's a very serious element to this as well. And we won't go into it today, but if you want to just learn something about how endemic this can become in an organization, Google for me the PowerPoint slide that killed 7 people. So there is a PowerPoint slide that was used to communicate at the within NASA about whether they should go or stay for the Challenger disaster. And it wasn't PowerPoint, it was how the slide was put together. And it led people to the conclusion that the launch should go ahead when it should not have. And they identified, a statistician who looked at the data and how they were using it, they identified that the use of the layout and the visual hierarchy on the slide led everyone to the belief that they should go ahead. And it's quite an interesting read. It's a little bit long for this session, but it shows it how badly wrong it can go once you start putting text in a format. See, people almost automatically assume a hierarchy, that the stuff at the top is more important than the bottom. The language can be very important. On that particular slide, the word significantly appears 7 times. So be very careful about how you lay text out on a slide and how you put it together. You know, Amazon, Jeff Bezos, he actually said this, you know, this is what he said. And this is what he said that really was the problem. So he came to the conclusion that let's just ban it completely. Now that's very scary for Microsoft. I mean, like to have somebody like Amazon ban PowerPoint altogether is a real challenge. And again, we don't often blame a car in a road accident. You know, it's very often the driver. And please remember that it's what you do with it. PowerPoint doesn't mean to be bad. It's what you're doing with it that's bad. And it's the structure and how you're laying it out. So how do they have meetings now in Amazon? Well, I'm led to believe that they stand up, as I'm doing now. They stand up for a meeting. So that immediately cuts things down to 20 minutes, no sitting down. So they took all of the sit down seats in a meeting room out and went for cocktail tables and went for high tables or electric tables that go up and down, and people stand for a meeting. But the other critical thing they did is that when you turn up at the meeting, you have to have read the memo. So the first question is have you read the memo? Because if you haven't read the memo about what the meeting's about, then you can't participate. And that's an interesting concept as well, because too many people go to meetings to find out for the first 20 minutes or 30 minutes, why are we here? You know, so if you've already communicated that, then that's a change in sort of ethos of meeting and meeting structure and architecture to actually ensure that there's going to be a faster delivery. So if the aim is to keep it short and sweet, and that's quite an interesting concept. And there's a whole piece of information around that. So a tough challenge and a tough pledge I'm asking you to consider, but promising to never use another bullet point would be one of my ideals and one of the things that I'd ask you to consider. Just I'm talking about the dot. I have no problem with, but it's how it looks. Speaking of how it looks, yeah, colors. Colors is something I get asked about all the time. And, you know, blues on yellows and yellows on blues, and using the defaults in PowerPoint, the templates that are available there, it all is going to switch people off to your presentation if you can't see things. So we're looking for high contrast between different colors. So try to use two contrasting colors. I see people putting gray on a sort of white background. It's hard to read, you know, so we need things to be simple. I see people putting a picture in the background and then, you know, putting text on top of it. We can't read it, you know, it's the colors are all fighting together. So we need to think about colors and how we lay them out to make things as easily readable as possible. What about these guys? Anybody recognize them? You remember these, the clipart? So we don't use any of these anymore either. If you're using these, you need this. So please stop using clipart. Yeah, we want it to be as simple and straightforward as possible. So icons are good, but watch out for the looping animated GIF. It can be very frustrating for people, and it can be just, you know, chart junk, we call it, you know, so it's just loaded on there for no reason. So watch out for that. So stop using actual clip art. It doesn't exist anymore. You'd have to go and look for it if you really wanted it. In the latest version of PowerPoint, it's already kind of removed. So the next mistake we see people using is using inappropriate fonts or mixed fonts. And I'm a fontist, yeah. So, you know, fontists are people who love fonts, yeah. And, you know, there are a lot of different elements to fonts. We have serifs, we have kerning. And a serif is the little curly line around the edge of a font. So you really want to try and consider, you know, the actual font to be as simple and straightforward as possible. So you're looking for Arials, Tahomas, Calibris. And if you've got the challenge of fonts being removed when you send PowerPoint, make sure your font is embeddable, yeah, and that you own the rights to your fonts. A lot of people have fonts, but they're not necessarily embeddable. Your corporate font needs to be allowed to go with the presentation. Otherwise, at the far end, it will get stripped out. So when would you use some of these crazy fonts? A newspaper cutting page maybe, or if you were trying to communicate something, you know, there is a particular time to use them. But in terms of your main communication, then try to keep your fonts as simple and straightforward as possible. And also play with kerning, which we looked at when we were putting text on a slide. If you look back to that video, which I'll send you the links to the other videos, but when we were looking at about week 3, we looked at kerning, which is putting text on and joining it together. It can make the text look less PowerPointy. You've got to sort of balance it between legibility and making it look interesting. So Arials and Tahomas is generally where you want to stay. The next common mistake we see is people not punctuating correctly. So Peter, would you like to read out this sentence to me since you've got your mic off there? Go ahead.
A woman without her man is nothing.
Thank you, Peter. So Peter read and punctuated the sentence that way. That's how he punctuated. He said, a woman, comma, without her man, comma, is nothing. And that is quite a male way to read it. That's the standard way to read it. And that is, but shall we change the meaning? Let's change the meaning by changing the punctuation. A woman, semicolon, without her, man is nothing. So one comma and a colon changes the meaning of a sentence, yeah, to the opposite of what it was. So punctuation in sentences is critical. Please try to, if you're punctuating, get it right. And if you're not sure about this stuff, or English is your second language, as it is mine, try to run it through Grammarly, for example, and you will find out, the right way to do it. So Grammarly.com is a great website that can help you with grammar and correcting stuff like this. So it's definitely worth a look at it. So watch out for punctuation. The next mistake we see quite a bit is people using the defaults in PowerPoint. So I'm talking about smartart. I'm talking about this arrow. I'm talking about this shape in the bottom right-hand corner. These shapes we've all seen before. And when you switch them on, you're essentially asking people to go to sleep. Why? Because you haven't customized them. You've just used the default, and I'm just didn't really have time, and I've thrown this together. So it says to your audience, I don't care about you. I don't care about the message that I'm about to deliver. And it's a real challenge because you think that PowerPoint has it in there for you, but it's not for you. Remember that PowerPoint slides are kind of like your children, yeah? You'll think they're beautiful if they're yours, yeah, because you put your mark on them. But, they're not your children, yeah? You really need to manage them to make them as unlike your children as possible. And nobody's going to admit to having ugly children. So you've got this sense of love with them, yeah, and sense of, look what I have created, But maybe you're not a graphic designer. Maybe you're just choosing the default and boring the pants off everybody. So it's a case of, try to customize your slides, try to customize these shapes to look different. And in the downloads area of our free app, we have lots of new ideas for you, and I'll give you the link to that at the end as we move through. So please stop using clipart. Yeah, try to use something else. This clipart and the smartart area, we would rarely go in there as designers, possibly for an organic organization chart, or possibly something that we would heavily then customize. So you need to do the customization, not just choose the default. If you choose the default, you better expect to receive a default reaction. And lastly, the last sort of mistake we see people making is trying to use animation to solve all of these problems. So they will throw everything onto a slide, and then they will try to do as many animations as possible. This one in particular, the swivel animation. Look, I have made it swivel. Isn't it amazing? And look, I'm suddenly, it's all good, isn't it? I've made it swivel. So making it swivel does not solve the data, does not help us communicate, does not communicate good information. It's just pointless, as a lot of what we see. So having an animation scheme and animating to a particular style is very, very important when you put this together. So stop using what we call cheesy animations. So in summary, as I mentioned earlier, try to lay out your slides and don't read them verbatim as I am doing now. Try not to move through things linearly, line by line, because that would be a mistake. Why not start at the bottom? Stop using clipart and smartart. Watch out for the fonts, the TLAs, the colors. Get rid of the bullet points and watch out for the spelling mistakes. And lastly, please dump the cheesy drop-down animations. We don't want to see those anymore. If you want to learn more about this stuff, I totally recommend Nancy Duarte's book, Slideology. She's a wonderful writer on a lot of these different areas. She's been making slides for 30 years. She's like our mother, our collective mother hen of all presentationists and presentologists around the world. She's based in New York and does a wonderful job. So she's got several books out at the moment. Slideology's been around a while, but if any of you are really data heavy and love data and need to communicate a lot of data, then her latest book called Data Story is also a very good read in terms of how do you communicate data more interestingly. And we did cover that in the past few weeks. We talked about how you can tell stories from data. And that could be something we delve deeper into as we move forward. Gar Reynolds' presentation Zen has been around since the 90s. Gar's based in Singapore, and he's a great guy. And of course, please feel free to look at our own website. We've got a load of resources on there as well. So we've got another sort of 20 minutes or so, and we're no way are we going to get through all this. So I'm just going to start this and start your brains thinking about how you create your story. What have I got here? These are my different areas I'm going to move down through just so you understand. And we're going to look at where we find great stories, yeah? And this is a great quotation. I think it was Jobs or one of those guys who came up with this. So, you know, in Gaelic, in Irish, in the native language of Irish, we call it Sean na Key, which is the art of telling a story, of passing a story from a grandfather to a grandson, and storytelling. And we seem to have lost it in terms of, you know, creating slides. We think that we'll just dump our data onto it. But by having a story is what people are going to remember, yeah? Do you remember I told you a moment ago about a story? Could you tell me what the story is? Was it about a Saudi gentleman who read his slides and he was a hostage taker? Why do you remember that right now? Because it was a story. It had a start, it had a middle, and it had an end to it. And stories are inherent in our being. We love stories. We love to hear a story. And, you know, the more we can tell stories, the better. Now, stories don't come out of PowerPoint or Prezi or slides or, you know, Keynote. That's where they get put. That's where we put the stories. They don't start there. The stories start not in a digital method, but in an analog method, by grabbing a piece of paper and working out what you're going to say at the start, what you're going to put in the middle, and what you're going to put at the end. That's where the story comes. That's where we create great stories. And Jobs, if he was working on the 2007 launch of the iPhone, would have spent this amount of time for his 30 slides, all over in that first third. Yeah, working on how he was going to put the message together, how it was going to be done. The second thirds would be essentially rehearsal and production, but they would, if you've ever done any script writing or any kind of writing, the beauty and the amazing side of it comes in that first section. I just watched Jojo Rabbit last night, and you can see why that story is absolutely amazing. It's just how it's put together, but also the story and the flow of it, and the rise and peak and fall of the story as it goes through. A very worthwhile movie to watch. But that's where you need to spend your time. Now, you might say to me, hang on a minute, I don't have 30 hours to spend working on my presentations. I got 30 minutes sometimes, yeah? And that's pretty normal, yeah, that people don't have time. But just understand that if you don't have time, you really can't spend, you know, the right amount of time to put it together. So really it's a case of spending as much time as you can in terms of putting the story together. Now, where do we get stuff from? Sometimes I have to just put slides like this in. These are my research areas. Yeah, just some of them, for example. So SlideShare, if you haven't been there, please go there. Yeah, if you're talking about, for example, well, let me use my own example. Yeah, I facelift and I make over slides for people. So where do I get my ideas from? Slideshare.net. But what sort of slides do I look at on slideshare.net? Beverly Hills plastic surgeons, because they do it to people and I do it to slides. So I go onto SlideShare and I look at, you know, I go and look at plastic surgery presentations, and I look at the language that's on there and I apply it to my business. Yeah, so it's not necessarily that you're stealing something. No idea is owned by anybody, but they've spent time and effort. SlideShare have millions and millions of presentations. So if you're in education and you want a presentation about, you know, the latest whatever in the latest pedagogy and in education, then, you know, you can go onto SlideShare, search for it on there, and you'll just be amazed at the amount of presentations that are on there. You can sometimes download them as PDFs or PPTs, and you can actually really have a good look at other people's presentations. For some reason, people are very keen to share their stuff up there, but the search level is very less. People don't go looking up there. Places like Quotation Page, if you need a great quotation, you know, there's nothing better than a short, impactful, powerful quotation. And Quotations Page is one of the greatest places to look for those. We used to look in google.com for images, but we have to be careful about rights, and there's a lot of royalty-free images within PowerPoint now, so we don't have to necessarily head off there. In terms of getting stuff and downloading stuff, you can use keepvid.pro to use if you want to bring down video, if you want to use it in your presentation, but there's another one there, YouTube Downloader. And in terms of animations and storytelling, look at the efforts that are going on televisions to create graphics and really interesting graphics, and then try to use those as an example. If you were to, use a benchmark of TVNZ or BBC as a benchmark, if you look at some of these little sort of stories that they tell in terms of, how global economy is being impacted by China, then, there are some wonderful storytelling going on there, and they've got some brilliant minds working on it. So feel free to kind of look at those and then learn from them. And that's what I do. I look at some of the graphics that are going on around me, and I try to take it from there. And obviously, Toastmasters has a ton of different resources around all of this type of stuff. Toastmasters is one of the oldest clubs in the world, but it's also developed a lot in the past 5 years. We've got a whole online learning. We've got how to set up a podcast, for example, is a course you can do. So it's not just, standing up in front of people and hear ye. We're not masters of toast. We're masters of actually delivering a presentation. And there is a big difference between a speech and a presentation, which most notably is the content, is the presentation and the media that you're using. So when you're trying to present, please try to bring the rule of thirds in. The wise kings, the little pigs, the musketeers, the white mice. There was Goldilocks and 3 bears. It wasn't 6 bears or 4 bears. There was only 3 stooges. But so 3 is all around us. And 3 in Toastmasters is called a triad in terms of communication. In literature, it's, in all sorts of poetry and literature. And I've never really had an accurate description of why it's so important or why it's important to us. In photography, it's called the rule of thirds. So, 3 seems to resonate with audiences as well. If you stand up and say, I'm going to talk to you today about 3 things, they're going to love you. They're absolutely going to love you. Yeah, they're going to absolutely lap that up. Now, it might be, 27 things and you've broken them down into 3 groups, but by breaking it down into groups and talking about 3 things and simple, not being stupid, it's very, very emotive for the audience. So try to focus in on that. Like, here's an example of a slide from Dubai Days, Dubai Pearl, a project that never really happened. But, we added in the word invest into this. So Dubai, great for live, work, play, and investing. And the 4th one just destroyed the slide. It completely looked horrible. So, trying to just stick to that rule of thirds is really important in terms of getting things across. Don't be afraid to make things simple in terms of putting stuff together. And that's quite a common request I get. Like, how do you make Twitter-like headlines, or SMS-based headlines? So you're trying to remove a lot of the information, because there's a lot of information around us. And how do we make things simple? And how do we make things in terms of getting stuff across on the screen? Well, the number one thing, as I mentioned, is to get rid of that bulleted concept of let's put our whole script up on the screen and read it. So you've got to get rid of it. And you've got to use SAI, not Gangnam style SAI, but this SAI, which is called picture superiority effect. So if you take a word and then turn it into, an image, and then turn it into a logo, you create a memory reaction to that image. The image is remembered right through the actual image, and experts call it SAI. So try to bring that in. We've heard a picture speaks 1,000 words, but do you really put it into impact? It's been proven that an hour after a presentation, that percentage of people will remember the text, whereas that percentage of people will remember the image. So you've got 6.5 times impact by using imagery. Now, I know that might seem real simple, but putting it into practical terms is quite tough for some people. It's been proven that, text actually communicates and confuses with the brain. So it's much easier to see text as imagery and trying to use images as much as possible. If you don't believe me that text is an image, then go ahead, read this. See, can you read it? This message serves to prove how our minds can do amazing things, impressive things. In the beginning, it was hard. But now on this line, your mind is reading it, hopefully automatically, without even thinking about it. Be proud. Only certain people can read this. Not true, actually. Most people can read it. So by jumbling the words and the letters around, you actually, so long as you keep the structure of it, it's amazing how your mind can see the text and then bring them through. Think of yourself as a child sitting looking at an apple in a book and learning A-P-P-L-E. You know, the image was the first thing and the most emotive thing that connected you to it. Also, don't be afraid to bring a prop along. I mean, like typically Jobs would have been given this slide to present for the launch of the MacBook Air. And yes, we need this data. I've no doubt that we need this data. We need to know the battery power. We need to know, you know, whether it's a solid state drive. But did he actually present that to the audience? No, he didn't. When he launched the MacBook Air, this was information was given out. What he did most notably is he showed an image of the MacBook Air, and then he did something which I want you all to take away from this presentation today. What I want you to remember is that he used a prop. And there is something so emotive about using a prop. He took the actual MacBook Air out from a brown manila envelope. So were I to tell you that I have traveled the length of India in a tuk-tuk, it would make perfect sense for me to bring my tuk-tuk along, yeah? And I spent a week driving around India in one of these. Now, that impact of actually showing and bringing something physical to a presentation is highly emotive. And, you know, you can create something that doesn't even exist. Kids, I'm noticing, are making stuff in roadblocks and they're building their own worlds, and you can actually take them and get them 3D printed. So you could have an idea and you could say, I'm going to bring this along and show it to people and pass it around if you're in person. So try to bring a prop because it's highly emotive for audiences. The other thing is to look at the numbers that you're communicating and try and make them more interesting. You know, Jobs talked about this device and that it, you know, it was a 5 GB MP3 player. Does that make sense to you? Do you like that? No, he didn't. He talked about 1,000 songs in your pocket. Now, 1,000 songs in your pocket is way more engaging than a 5 GB MP3 player. Yeah. So you've got to try and bring these micro stories into whatever you're pitching. And Jobs was a master at this. Let me give you another example. There's a computer in the States, believe it or not. It's made by IBM and Roadrunner. And you're not going to believe this, but it runs at 1 petaflop. Is that amazing? Anybody know what a petaflop is? Because I have no idea. A petaflop is a speed of operation, which is very, very fast, yeah? And if I was to explain the power of a petaflop to you, you would have to stack 1,000 of today's fastest laptops on top of one another to create the power of a petaflop. And that stack of laptops on top of one another would be 1.5 miles high. Does that make sense? Actually, it doesn't. 1,000 laptops stacked on top of one another is not 1.5 miles high. And here's an amazing thing about presenting is that this doesn't have to be true. It's called a factoid. A factoid, O-I-D, a factoid. It's a fact that isn't necessarily true. It's just there to make people interested. So you want to get people interested. Now I know I've got my buddy Scott out there, and yeah, he's a lawyer, and you got to get your facts right and you got to be true. So, you know, watch out for getting your facts right. But let me show you a couple of examples. Like, for example, this company have this amount of light towers, and it's enough, that light is enough to light 10 football fields. Okay, so there's an example of using a factoid to create an interesting piece of information. So every year they deliver this amount of compressed air, which would be enough to, for example, do this. Yeah. So, you know, just nobody's really going to challenge you on that. Nobody's really going to do the mouths on it and come back at you. You're just creating an interesting moment. You're creating an interesting moment. And so long as you're not hurting anybody or you're not miles out, then nobody's going to necessarily challenge you. Yeah, in terms of putting it together. Essentially, what you're trying to do is you're trying to get that holy crap moment. You're trying to get that, oh, wow moment. That's what you're trying to get. In fact, we're not presenters. We're drug dealers. You want to be a drug dealer with me? What's the most legal drug that you can deal in terms of emotion? What gets released in people when you make them feel something, when you get them, wow, yeah, when you get them really leaning forward, not leaning back when people present, yeah? So what drug do we release when that happens. I'm getting a few people
Master?
clicking on my chat there, so I've got a few comments in there. So let me just grab the chat and have a look as we go through. Oh, I can't see it right now. We'll come back to it as we go through. It is, of course, serotonin and dopamine, which essentially do this. Yeah. So that's what we're trying to do when we, make people emotive within our presentation. We're trying to get people to go, wow. And that's essentially what we're going to do. So that was kind of half of my little presentation. I'm just going to hop in and have a look at and we'll probably got a little space to do a little bit more as we go through. But that was really just kind of, we got through to kind of emotions. And the next part is really how we come into writing our script and how we focus in on that. But we're kind of coming down to the last few minutes. Are there any particular questions anybody wants to shout out? And I'll also just have a quick look at the chat as we go through here and see what's going on. Endorphins, good. Yeah, you're right. A suggested font style. Yeah, 30 points is pretty big. I would agree with you. But font sizes, essentially you can have a lot of your text down in the notes pages, which is the lower end down below your slides, and use the notes pages for a handout. So when you save your presentation, you can save it as a PDF with the slide above and the notes below. Yeah, so you can create your handout and a lot of the information. That then releases all the information from the top of your slide onto the bottom of your slide. So that's how you can just have the key words up on the slide. Now, when we come back next week, we're going to look at a few practical examples of how we take big blocks of text on a slide and then put them into to make them more interesting. And we can have a look at how we go about doing that. It's a difference essentially between wisdom and knowledge. Because if wisdom is knowing that tomato is a fruit, then knowledge is knowing not to put it in the fruit salad. And I've just said that the wrong way around. So if knowledge is knowing that tomato is a fruit, wisdom is knowing not to put it into a fruit salad. So you got to leave the tomatoes off the screen and try and make it more interesting. How do I create a prop for remuneration? Thank you, Esther. That is a wonderful question. And I shall float that open to the entire table and allow the combined knowledge of everyone. Remuneration. Essentially, we see props being used in different ways. One of the key props that I see people bringing is a brain. Go get a brain. Yeah. Now, where do you get a brain from? You can buy brains. You can buy a plastic brain, but bring a brain. So, like for example, I've got some knowledge workers here and some educators here. That's what you're selling. You're selling brain power. So bring a brain. Yeah, this is what we do with your kids. We will make them brainy. You know what I mean? So, don't necessarily think literally when you think of remuneration. How do I bring a prop around your remuneration? Try to think of the net effect of it. Try to think of iconic things, because people love it when you bring something iconic. And if you watch any great presentation, you'll see people bring something physical or show something. So the classic example of that would be Roy Beck showing us one gumball. Yeah, so one little gumball. Yeah, he holds it up and he shows us one gumball, and it represents 1 million people. And then he starts putting them in the jar. Yeah, and he starts showing the disparity between different. And it's one of the best, most watched TED Talks ever as showing. So just Google that, Roy Beck gumballs, and you will see a presentation where he starts off with something so simple that then expands out. So, where you're trying to explain a crisis and bringing something physical and then presenting with it is such an emotive thing. So try to watch TED, because TED brings all of this stuff together as we go forward. How do we use an infographic? From Russ. Thanks, Russ. Look, we build infographics within PowerPoint. Yeah, so we're creating slides that have a really interesting look and feel, but that are infographical, and then we animate them onto the slide. We covered that in the past 2 weeks, and after today, I will send you an email with a link to each one of those different videos. Scroll through, and you can see how we did that. Throw money at them. Thanks, Jay Bennett. Yeah, I'm not sure how we throw money at people. We could throw fake money, monopoly money at them would be a good idea. So definitely we'll do that. Any verbal questions? Anybody want to ask a question? Because one of the core things I told you is don't take time away from people. And we've kind of run out of time for our session today. But I'm really looking forward to next week and getting into kind of more into the storytelling and how we tell stories and bring it together. Any questions? Anybody want to come out from the behind the hidden the silence? I can switch all your mics on there if you want me to. So I will try to unmute all if I could. Anybody got any questions, or just type them in there if you want to? No, okay, that's good, no problem. We got about 2 minutes to go, so I'm hanging around if anybody wants to chat. But I'm looking forward to seeing my Toastmasters tomorrow night at Queenstown. Please come along to our Toastmasters meeting. It's all on Zoom. You're very welcome. It's the same link, actually. You don't even need to do anything. It's just tomorrow night at 7 p.m. we meet, and you're very welcome as a visitor. And we're having our first hybrid meeting, or second hybrid meeting, where Zoom's open and live, and we welcome all guests along. It's just for an hour and a half from 7 to 8 p.m., 8:30 p.m. So thank you, and I look forward to seeing you back here, same time, same place. I'll send you an email and with an overview of what we're going to be covering, and really look forward to seeing you all. But have a great week and go make some beautiful slides, will you? Hey, Cecilia, how are you? Good to see you. All right, guys, see you in a week. All right, go and do something beautiful, please. See you, Peter.
Bye.
Take care.
Thank you.
See you guys.
Thank you, Johnny.
No, you're welcome, Cecilia. No problem. Good to see you the other day.
Yeah, great to see you.
Hopefully we started your thinking anyway, so it'll be good.
Yeah. No, it was very good, very interesting.
All right, team. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you
See you.
soon. Bye.
Bye.
Hey, Karen, if you're listening to me, I will send a link to everybody after this meeting, and I will make sure you all get the other
Okay.
the 5 links. They're all on YouTube, so I'll make sure you get them all. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, John. This is the first time I attended your meeting, so it's quite great for me.
Most welcome. Where are you coming from?
I'm from the Philippines, in Manila.
In Manila, cool. Great city. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. How are you guys? Are you all well there? You getting a lockdown? Still in lockdown?
Yes. I work for the government, so we are all the Department of Education, actually.
Okay, great.
So we are all working from home, and we'll be starting several webinars for our non-teaching personnel.
Great. Good idea. Yeah, well, please feel free to look through those videos, and if you find stuff that's useful, then let me know if I can help in any way. So yeah, I've just been recording and putting them straight up there, so it'll be great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. Yeah, because I'm looking for some ways to maybe make our presentations more interesting. Like for webinar, we have less interaction with the people. So
yeah, the first one's probably interesting for you as well, which is virtual presenting, how to make yourself look more engaging on the screen. And then the last one, the audience engagement one, the 5th one, is worth looking. So the 1st and the 5th are worth looking at, because last week we did how to create breakouts and how to, have you ever been in one of the breakouts, for example? Like, breakouts are great. So we looked at lots of different ways of using Zoom to create more engagement.
okay.
Cool. So that'll be
We'll
good.
check that one out.
Yeah, check that out.
Thank
for
you.
Sure. Now, have a good week. See you. Take care.
Yeah.
Bye.
You too. Take care. Thank you very much. Bye.